All right, so I just finished up the Halo Infinite campaign about an hour or so ago, and I just wanted to sit down for a minute and give some of my thoughts around the campaign itself. I'm not going to be spoiling any story elements or any of that, nothing towards like the end of the game at all. I will be talking about some of the structural parts of the game necessarily with the gameplay and some of the things it has you doing, but nothing, like I said, in terms of story or plot development there. But I just kind of wanted to sit down for a minute and go over what I experienced here with this campaign, because 343 is they're going in an interesting direction here with the Halo series. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure that like button helps out a ton. And if new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below and ring that notification bell so you can keep up to date with all the uploads here on the channel. So first, let's start off with the beginning of the game, which is you playing as Master Chief, and you're in this ship. And you're going through what is a basic setup for Halo. It makes sense. It's the idea of we're going to teach you some of the things that you will be using for the rest of the game, like the grappling hook, which you just start with immediately. They show it off somewhat even in the opening cutscene where Master Chief is fighting against a bunch of enemies, just to kind of hammer it home, hey, this is some kind of item that Master Chief is has at least grown accustomed to using. Anyway, you go through this initial hour, I would say, that's kind of like a tutorial mode, sort of, and they end with this big set piece of everything exploding around you. You eventually get the Zeta Halo, and they hit you with that Fallout coming out of the vault moment and seeing the world in front of you. This, though, with Halo, and I think that part at least was well done, but then we get to the semi-open world itself, which is the way it was described, and it makes more sense now to me after going through the game what exactly they're saying here. Because when you initially start, you get the map open, you're like, whoa, I can go to all of these different points, I can travel around, I can do some exploration here. That is much different than what we're used to with a typical corridor shooter like Halo game. Sure, there were some levels where it was more open. I think the second level in Halo Combat Evolved kind of gave that feeling. I think it was just called Halo was the title for the level, but it's where you crash land and you're kind of just walking around what feels like a large sandbox level. And of course you have the silent cartographer, which also gives off those kind of vibes. This is, think of those levels, but to like a massive degree, right? So you can pick out different spots you want to go. You can take over bases, essentially, where you can then spawn in different weapons or vehicles, and even bring other soldiers with you that will legitimately help. Like, if you're preparing to go try to take down one of these fortresses that they put on the map, yeah, you might want to kind of group up with some ally AI in a Warthog, get a rocket launcher, and just kind of prepare yourself for what's generally an absolute obscene amount of enemies. I will say probably my favorite activity on the map, because they have a couple of them, large fortresses. You have like these propaganda towers and collectibles like Spartan cores and even pieces of armor for the multiplayer scattered around. I really enjoyed going after these targets that they had set up, and they were basically different members of the Banished that had like a rap sheet or a reputation to them, and a lot of times they had a unique weapon that you would then get for your inventory and you could spawn in at any time. I think some of them were just more powerful. Others had unique attributes, like there was a rocket launcher you could get that would home in on different enemies or vehicles. I really liked going to these different points and just being able to defeat these enemies. They even tried to make a grunt tough, but it was fun just figuring out ways to defeat them. At times, they were pretty difficult. You might go there and one of them just has an entire Wraith waiting for you with an army in front of them. You also get Valor points, and as you collect these points, you can unlock other things, whether it's better vehicles like the Gun Goose or different weapons, which they do have upgraded versions of the weapons that you've been using in the multiplayer now. I've talked at length of the gameplay, specifically like the gunplay, the items, the gadgets. Those are all present here when I talked about the multiplayer side of things, and it still feels very good here. And you also will be upgrading those different gadgets as you go along. They have plot elements set up to where Master Chief will start to acquire these different gadgets. But beyond that, you'll collect Spartan cores, which will then upgrade those different gadgets. And I was looking through them. I think some of these feel like they get more better jumps in terms of their power than others. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are going to upgrade the shields pretty quickly because you get like a 15% boost to your shield strength and integrity every level. But the drop wall, like, is a great one to start upgrading because it will become stronger, it will become larger, and even give your bullets like electrical charges as you fire through them. And it is something you will be using actually quite a bit throughout the campaign, especially later on in more difficult settings, because you'll just have enemies with like ridiculously hard-hitting weapons, and they just have a ton of health. So you definitely want to look through your skill tree if you're not necessarily going to be exploring every inch of the Zeta Halo, just to make sure you're upgrading the ones you'll actually need. As for exploring, this I would say is a much smaller scale, tighter knit Ubisoft game, essentially. Like, the Ubisoft games got out of control. Like Far Cry 6, I played that when it came out. I played all the way I beat it. But there was still so much stuff going on that map, to the point where you're just like, there's just too much going on here. I think Halo, they simplified it more or less. There is certainly less to do, but every time you complete a task or free a base or go through a fortress, it actually feels like you've accomplished a lot more. And I actually prefer that. Less things to do, maybe more steps to complete them, but a greater reward, or at least a feeling of impact on the game itself when you do complete it. That said, it's not going to take long to complete everything on the map. Most of the fortresses were probably the longest things I would do, and maybe 15 minutes on a lot of them. There were a few that took longer, where you'd have to take out these different reactors and just you had to wait for them to kind of pop up out of the ground and find the control rooms. Others, you just freed soldiers that were being held captive, and that wouldn't take too long. So you see these big fortresses, not too long to get through them, and then you're kind of on to the next one. Now, I do want to come back to one of the gadgets. That's specifically the grappling hook. This is something that I wasn't too fond of with the game. Not the grappling hook itself, but the fact that it's grouped in with the other gadgets. I know technically it's seen that way in like the multiplayer, but you're going to use the grappling hook way more than anything else in the campaign, to the point where I was really looking to this being a hot key or button somewhere else on your controller outside of the typical pool of gadgets. You have to change between them, similar to how you would change between your grenade types. And it's kind of annoying because you really have to stop and think about it. You're like, okay, I got to press the D-pad. Then okay, which one do I want to pick? All right, cool. It's not seamless, and it doesn't feel second nature. The grappling hook should be second nature for Master Chief, because the game itself, I think, sees you using that a lot for different bosses that you're fighting to get away from certain attacks, or even just scaling ledges. There were times where I was like, all right, go grappling hook. Then I just throw out my drop ball by accident. I'll comment on the story very briefly without giving anything away. I was perfectly fine with it. I liked the ending, and yes, it's Halo Infinite. It does set it up so you can continue on and they can keep adding more and more content, but they've already told us that that's their plan. So I was expecting some sort of after credit scene or cliffhanger, just a way to continue the Halo Infinite game and series itself as a live service. So the fact that there is a promise of more content going forward, it does seem like this is a way for them to just get that kickstarted and moving along. A good base game, essentially, for, 5-6 years from now, by the end of this current Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S generation, could be a massive campaign to play through. And if you haven't played a Halo game before, you want to jump into this, I think you want to play the other Halo games. Technically you can, because the plot itself is pretty straightforward. The Banished are bad. Master Chief is good. The Banished are trying to rebuild the Zeta Halo to activate it and wipe out everything around them. Your Master Chief, go stop them from doing that. It's pretty easy, right? It makes sense there. But there's a lot of underlying lore that they tap into here. And then obviously one of the big things is the relationship between John 117 and Cortana. If you don't have any experience with that from the previous games, a lot of stuff that they attempt to do here is going to be kind of lost on you and won't have that same impact as it would for a longtime Halo fan. Okay, now let's talk about the overall structure of this game. I said I wasn't going to spoil any story elements. I'm not, but the structure of this game, I don't know if it's considered spoiling stuff, but I'm going to be pretty vague here. It feels like 343 had two different games and just kind of slapped them together and just hoped it would work. Because I talked about that semi-open world style game. It is there. But then like halfway through the game, they just go back to a traditional Halo. Like it was kind of odd. Like it caught me off guard even when I'm playing it. And I'm like, all right, cool. This is fun. I'm going and doing all these different spires, these different things in the open world. And then there's like the second half where you're just going through corridors, like point to point to point. It's like just kind of teleporting you around. And it's like, oh, I guess we're done with that open world for now. I will tell you one thing though, if you are skull hunting, some of those points you can't go back to right now, because remember, they did tell us that at this time you're not able to revisit different missions. So if you see a little icon pop up that says, hey, there's 0 of 1 skulls here when you first enter a place, or audio logs, make sure you try to find them, because you're not going back unless you restart the entire game. And at the end of it, of course, like most games that are open world, they throw you back in and you can go pick up any of the things in that open world. However, any of those missions that you had played before that were more linear fashion, you're not going back to. Also, it really feels like this game was supposed to have co-op when it launched. There's a few reasons for that. One, when you collect these bases and you take them over, there's 4 different ammo stations and weapon selection spots. Like, I looked right at it and said, oh, well, okay, that's where me and then 3 other people would be picking out our weapons right now. And then, oh, wait, there's the Warthog that I would jump in, and then 2 other people would. And it's like that a lot. There are many times where you'll come up to a spot ahead of a larger base. They just have a bunch of vehicles out there for you to pick from and a bunch of weapons. They're like, oh, this is where me and my friends would start picking out different items to conquer this next base with. Instead, you're jumping into a Warthog in a very lonely fashion, no gunner at all, and just kind of driving towards the base. We know co-op's coming eventually. They said it's going to be like 6 months after release, like May next year. So here's hoping that's something they can figure out. I understand. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, there's a lot of places where co-op would break, specifically with interactions, different enemies, I'm sure bases, and the fact that it is like this semi-open world game. But still, it's something that you will notice as you play through by yourself, that it wanted to have there at launch, but they just couldn't make it work. And I think that's the big takeaway a lot of people will have here. It's a good baseline for what they eventually will build towards, which is going to be their final version of Halo Infinite 5 or 6 years from now. They've made that very clear, is that this is going to be an ongoing project for them. And is that a problem right now for early adopters or people looking to get into this? Is it worth the $60 that they're asking if you want to buy the boxed version or just on the digital storefront? It's really hard to say. Like, I feel like if you're a Halo fan right now and you want to see this part of the story, you're going to buy in and play it, right? But if you're a newcomer to the series, I mean, the first thing I would do is download the multiplayer, see what you think about with the gunplay and the feeling of the game. And if you like it, yeah, I think there is a solid 20, maybe even 25 hours you can get out of Halo Infinite. However, if you're someone who really likes the co-op aspect, you might just wait for campaign until they add that in the first half of 2022 and then jump in at that time. If you're already a member of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate, yeah, you should download the game to try it. I think it's certainly worth at least that much. It is interesting that we're kind of in that space now to where you can just recommend it and say, hey, you go and download it. I will say it does take about an hour to 2 hours to get things really moving in that open world. So at the very least, if you download the game to try it, get through to that point and just see what you think about 343's take on kind of this open world Halo. But I will say I have had fun with the Halo Infinite campaign. I probably will still go through and just complete the different things on the map to get all that done. Like I said, I want to go through and hunt the rest of the targets that they have set up and just, for the most part, fill out the map. But let me know what you guys think about the Halo Infinite campaign. Specifically, though, let me know what you think about the structure of the game. Did you get that feeling that they had this open world concept and then they had to just veer off into traditional Halo halfway through? Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.